Of course, and like you rightly said, where we have reforms is to, or why we have this reform is
Yes.
to strengthen the country's electoral system.
Yes.
And you also highlighted that, this entire process has been marred by a lot of controversy, mainly because of one clause, which is Clause 60, that has to do with the mandatory transmission of election results. Now, this has dominated, the entire discussion, taking away, attention from what truly matters in this amendment. Now, can you take us through all other amendments that, seem to strengthen, or that will strengthen the electoral process as it stands?
Well, I know that there was this issue of intention of amending the law that has to do with calling witnesses, where on the face of the documentary evidence is very clear there is irregularity, because the onus has always been on the petitioner who is alleging that there is electoral irregularity or that the result that was announced by INEC is wrong. Now you are the one to call the witnesses, because whoever alleges must prove. So Section 137 under the 2022 Act made a provision that if you have a certified true copy of the documentary evidence that shows irregularity on the face of that document, you don't need to call witnesses anymore. But the judicial interpretation of that section has retained the fact that you still have to call witnesses. That when you come and when you come and place those documentary evidence, maybe the certified true copy, that it is regarded as dumping, you still have to speak to it. If there are differences in the figures in whatever you are dumping, somebody still have to be cross-examined on it. So there was this intention, why don't we do away with calling witnesses, so many witnesses, knowing the timeline within which you have to prove your case is very limited. Calling all those witnesses will really linger and make it impossible for you to prove your case. Can we limit it to documentary evidence? If it's very clear on the face, why do we have to call? So I thought that that particular section would have actually received the acceptance of the legislators. I don't think it did. They are still insisting that witnesses must still be called. And so it's still a problem. So nobody is even talking about that section. People are really concentrating on the issue of electronic transmission. But I saw it, I raised an alarm when it was being, I said, God, I thought we would have sorted it out, so that by the time you have a documentary evidence before the court that shows irregularity on the face of it, why do you need to call a witness anymore? So that has not been sorted out. Then the issue of strengthening the political parties, I think there is controversy as to removing indirect process now. It is now direct and consensus. So the question is whether the legislators have the right now to, since the court says it don't interfere with the political party program or whatever manner with which they elect their officers. If you now insert in the law that it must be indirect, are you not directly interfering with the political power to do whatever they want to do by way of regulation? But then it is now the law that it must be by way of direct and consensus. So indirect is removed.
Now, SCN, do you think it is deliberate that some of these points you've just highlighted within here, that argument from the national, from the lawmakers, and we seem to have made a lot of a statement about the electoral transmission. They didn't talk about the calling of witnesses. They didn't even talk about the breakdown of communication failure, what it really meant. They didn't talk about that. They didn't talk about some other germane things that can enrich our electoral process.
That's correct.
Do you think it is deliberate? Because in this National Assembly, you have both the ruling party and the opposition parties, and they were silent on these other arguments.
Yeah, that is a very important issue. That's why I did an article after the law was passed, and I said, look, the INEC has a lot of responsibility now on their hands to look at this law as passed and signed by the president now to do some level of clarifications, that will really help the entire process, because transparency is key. Yeah. If you leave some words ambiguous, you are confusing the courts the more, and they're going to have different interpretations. So why do we have to now go into litigation that doesn't have an end? So what is communication failure? That was left,
beyond INEC to do that.
Yeah, INEC, we have to. They have to clarify.
They have the power to interpret what the lawmakers have passed.
What guideline?
Okay.
The law recognizes the fact that you have the Constitution, the Electoral Act, and the Electoral Guideline of INEC. you know, that these are the body of laws that guide the electoral process. So if there is anything that is ambiguous in any of the laws that has already been, because the law cannot say everything. The statute may not have to, you know, but the issue of interpretation and guidelines now will clarify the position of the law. Of course, what is the mischief that they wanted to cure? The mischief that the people who wanted to cure is, look, this thing was not in the law book. Are you following me? We're now putting it into the law book. Then you now bring a proviso. That proviso now leaves ambiguity. So what do? You have to clarify what it means. At what point is communication failure, you know, noticed? Who declares it? What is the timeline within which you can really say that there is no network? But if you saw what the Senate President said yesterday, he said something that is very, very germane. He said this issue of we're making so much trouble about electronic transmission, that is already taken care of by saying that immediately after election result has been announced by the presiding officer and then recorded in EC8A form, right? Signed by all the parties. The next position is that you now transmit. You may have a problem where there is network failure. It will not go immediately. But the moment you have transmitted, that one works both offline and online. By the time you get to where there is a service network, it will drop. So if it drops, so what is the issue? We don't have any issue again. Are you following me? Because if you are now arguing that there's going to be a network failure, no problem. But make sure you upload. Immediately you have announced the result. By the time you get to where there is network sustenance, so you don't have any issue, it will drop. So even when they go to the collection center, this result also will be there. So all this, we are really not addressing. And I also gave an advice in another sister's television. I said, look, it is now that the political parties need to be a bit more vigilant. Employ agents that are educated, that knows the law, that knows educate them. Don't go and get an illiterate to be your agent, both at the collection and unit, polling unit. Get them that are educated. What people usually do is that collect all the polling unit result by the collection agent, from all the polling units. By the time you enter into the collection center, whatever you are going to sign there inside the collection center is what has been reflected and what is given to you. Because EC8A, the presiding officer submitted to the collection officer. You have a copy. The security agency have a copy. Then what they are now saying that the one that is electronic also will be looked at when they are now computing to see that there is no problem. So I don't see any much issue in this matter. If we really want the country to move forward, we have recorded some level of progress in this matter. We have made a movement. IREV now is not recognized. Transmission now is not recognized. The only problem was that proviso. But the proviso can be explained by INEC, what it means. So there won't be any issue.